What's up, everybody? It's Steph Love in the building. Welcome back. Another week. The podcast. I'm so happy that you are here with Maybe I'm Rambling. Tonight, sipping with me is none other, such a good brother, Mr. Jean Semelfort. He's the owner of the Cactus Center, and also he's a psychotherapist. We really just want to sit down and have a conversation about Black mental health. So like I always ask, man, like I'm sipping. What are you sipping on, sir?
First and foremost, I appreciate you having me on the show, but I'm trying to stay hydrated. So I have my big glass of water.
Okay, you got the high quality H2O.
Yeah, pretty much. On my
Okay.
Bobby Boucher.
Okay. So you done left me out here all alone, like I'm drinking alone, but not alone. So I got the glass, right? Profit, I'm fancy. So tonight I'm trying. It's called Lush Sangria.
Okay.
This is a pear apple ginger flavor. Now this is from a Black-owned company. They're just debuting in Jersey. Some Black women. So I had to go support. So let me taste this. You're gonna get this first reaction. Hold on. Oh, yes, friend.
It's on point.
Yeah, it's on point.
Nice.
You get the ginger, but you get like the alcohol in it, but you get it's on
Yeah.
point. Yes.
Because sometimes that ginger be strong.
Yeah, but it's like perfect for this. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's what's up. So yeah, I'm glad that you agreed to jump on with me, but we are living in some very interesting times. And so when we think about, mental health, I know a lot of folk are suffering. For me, I've struggled with some things off and on. I think everything is happening between the resurgence of protests and the Black Lives Matter movement becoming stronger than ever. I have been in my fields, and I've been in and out of counseling. I had a white male counselor. I tried women counselors, and that just wasn't my thing. I felt judged. I tried a white male. I felt more like entertainment, and then trying to find a Black male counselor was difficult. I found one, but I broke up with him after like 6 months. So I'm back on the search, and I just, I wanted to just really jump in. I guess my first conversation piece is, why is it so damn hard to find a Black therapist, and especially a Black male therapist?
Yeah, I mean, it is difficult, and I think even not as just a psychotherapist or speaking as a psychotherapist, even just looking for my own, services and looking for Black clinicians, right? I think they're like unicorns out here, right? And unfortunately, it's not a high representation of Black folks in the field of mental health. I think we're on an up and up right now, right? Because I think there's a lot of national conversation around it. You have particular celebrities that are kind of jumping on. You have some mental health clinicians that are actually prominent and pretty good, and they're helping in kind of that increased awareness and breaking down stigmas and barriers as far as access. But still, right, we're still at a deficit around that. And there's statistics that are speaking to it, right? That when you're looking at the percentage of clinicians, right, that Black folks make up a very small percentage of the mental health clinicians, and Black males make up a very small percentage of mental health clinicians, which, I think mental health is unfortunately contrary to some of the characteristics and things that we learn about being Black, being Black folks in America, being Black folks anywhere in the world. And then you add on the part of masculinity, right, as Black men, right? I think that even distances us further from, right, mental health concepts, right? I think acknowledging our own emotional stuff is not what we do, right? We supposed to be real cool. Bell Hooks talks about this idea of being real cool, that the Black male is supposed to present as unbothered, calm, collective all the time. And this acknowledgement of vulnerability, or feelings or emotions or presenting any form or semblance of weakness
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not a part of the quote unquote construct. So, you know, it makes sense why you don't find a lot of Black men in the field. But it's unfortunate because a lot of folks like yourself are looking for Black men in the field.
Yeah. Yeah, cause I have like my boys, and those are probably some of the best conversations I have because men just keep it straight, right?
Yeah.
There's no feelings in it, so sometimes I need to not have a feelings conversation. So I'm like, yes, that's what I need. So that's a struggle right now, but whatever that journey is going to be, it's going to be. I have to put it in God's hands. But you talked about some of the stigmas associated with um, Black folk in general, especially men going to counseling. And I wanted to dig into that a little bit, right? Like, I think the conversation is, why I need to go pay somebody to talk about how I'm feeling. One, two, like they can't even identify their feelings probably. So like,
Right.
what is counseling? What does that look like? What is its purpose? I think we need to understand it in order to start to have the conversation about why it's so important to participate.
No, I mean that's real. I think unfortunately when we're thinking about counseling, right, a lot of folks are referring it to talk therapy. And so when you add talk to it, like you said, right, I could just go talk to my boys, I could talk to the homies,
Yeah.
right? I could talk to my partner, I could talk to other people for free, right? Why would I pay this individual, right, to talk about my particular issues and what's going on for me? And so I think the thing we want to recognize with psychotherapy or therapy in general, right, is that this is a trained clinician, right, who is following a particular set of skills, principles, modalities when it comes to right working and understanding that issue that you're presenting to them. And so there's like a slew of modalities, right? A slew of therapeutic styles that folks come with. And some styles work for people, some styles don't. You have those styles that are very much so skills based, where it's like, I'm going to help you develop your skills, right? And it's going to be straightforward. We're not going to really talk too much about the past. We're not going to talk too much about these in-depth traumas that you have. We're just going to kind of focus on the here and now, the present issues of what's going on, and we're going to work on building skills around addressing those things. Where you have some psychotherapists who their focus is to help you understand those past traumas, help you make the connections between your childhood experiences to your present day relationship dynamics, and that in itself sometimes takes a little longer for folks. It takes more time to get in depth, to get into the nitty gritty of those things.
Yeah.
But I think those stigmas right within our communities is that I'm not supposed to let you into my secrets, right?
Ah.
I'm not supposed to let you into my secrets, because if I give you access to my secrets, then what are you going to do with that? And
Mm.
unfortunately, right, it's a particular, when we're talking about systemic racism and we're talking about these things, right, that as Black folks, right, we had to learn how to develop secrets. We had to learn coded language, right, so that we don't give too much information, because
Right.
we found that in moments of giving too much information, right, that unfortunately different systems have betrayed us
Right.
in numerous ways. And so how do we protect those secrets? And let alone, right, we have family dynamics where we don't want to jeopardize the image of our family, right? It's already bad enough that Black people, right, have a particular image. I don't want to contribute to folks looking at my family in a particular way, right? So if I experience, said trauma in my family dynamics, and I go and tell that, right, then am I kind of fueling or feeding into a particular stigma or perception around my Black family, right? And as Black folks, we feel very protective,
Yeah.
of those things. So I'm asking, like therapy is asking people to do some very vulnerable work
Yeah.
that requires a lot and is almost contrary to the ways that we needed to engage in to survive, right, presently.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's so true. And when you talked about keeping the secrets, I remember when I was speaking with the white male therapist, like I was so reluctant to provide certain information. So I'm like, what are you going to think about me? And then what are you going to go and say to my family? Like I know technically, legally, you can't talk about this outside of this space. But in my
Mm-hmm.
mind, you going home to your partner and you spilling all my business, so now I want to fight you, right?
Yeah.
So now I'm not really doing the work because I can't trust that I can be vulnerable in this space and not be judged. And like I described, old boy, I was like, I felt like I was his entertainment. So I'm here having a moment, right? Like, here we go, about to have a breakthrough. And you're like, oh, back that up. Wow, that happens, dog. No. You know, so with that said, do you think that Black folk should be with Black counselors, or a counselor of color who may be able to better identify with some of the struggles that we have as folks of color in America?
Yeah. You know, so I think when you're dealing with a counselor that is sharing your particular identity, it kind of decreases or drops the barrier, right? Some barriers. Because I think there are some particular concepts that you may understand, right? Or you're experiencing, or you may have a certain language around describing that experience. And so when you connect with a counselor that looks like you, right? Or may even be kind of from a similar dynamic or similar sort of situation like yourself, right? Then there's ways you can describe it without having to further explain. And also, right, kind of that feeling of, how do you say, feeling like eroticized in some way, right? That your pain, your Black pain, and explaining it, right, feels eroticized. And that almost sounds kind of like the experience that you had with the white counselor, right? And so it's maybe least likely to happen or occur with Black clinicians. Now, I do want to say, right, that sometimes you do have clinicians, regardless of color, who operate therapeutically from a Eurocentric way, right? And so they're very, very much so by the books, and they're very much so not as intersectional in their, you know, their approach, not as in tune with systemic dynamics, and very much so may not actually validate appropriately, right, particular situations and dynamics that you are dealing with, and give, you know, note to those systemic things and how they're playing out in kind of like the micro ways that folks are experiencing them.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think it helps drop a barrier. I think it does something when you see the modeling, right? When you see another person of color engaging in a vulnerable work with you, emotional work with you. And it does something when you could say explicitly what you're feeling in whatever vernacular, you know, you have, right? So I remember seeing a meme where the meme was saying, you know, I want to be able to go to my therapist and say, yo, that shit had me tight. Yeah. Right. And right. And there isn't this further elaboration around it that you need to do. Like that is an emotional expression. Yeah. Right. And you don't have to explain it, and it's understood and it's explored and it's unpacked in a way that feels safe. Yeah. And so I think sometimes that's helpful. So I don't know. I don't like to kind of assign shoulds, okay, right? Because I do think that sometimes there may be clinicians who are non-Black clinicians that are good at very intersectional, multicultural work, where they themselves are very clear and understand their privilege, how it could show up within a session with a person that is of color, right, and work through those particular things. So I think it could benefit in some way, shape, or form, I think. But I do think when you work with clinicians of color, particularly Black clinicians, and things that sort, that it does something different. There's something that it counteracts the sort of stereotypes and the stigmas that we have around mental health, yeah, just by that interaction and that relationship alone.
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense. So if I'm out and I'm like, all right, let me go ahead and jump into this, because we got folks out here. I've been seeing some posts about like this jump out to the stigma challenge, doing the push-ups for 25 days and things like that. If that inspires me to say, okay, let me give this a try, what am I looking for to determine if this is going to be the right relationship to do this work?
Yeah, I mean, that's a real question, right? Because what folks are looking for vary, right? Some people want to go into a space and they want to immediately feel safe, right? They go into a space, I want to feel safe with my clinician. I want to feel safe with my therapist. So I know there's been times in my own personal search for therapy where I've had a therapist say one word, right? And for me, I'm like, I can't rock with you,
Yep.
right? Because like I've expressed something, something in depth. Like I'll even transparently say I had a therapist, a clinician that I went to see one visit, and that clinician said to me in a situation that I was open about, and I was telling them, and they described my situation as interesting. Right? And that was the emotional response or the response at that moment. And for me, it's significantly invalidating. And so I knew in that moment, particularly that I didn't want to continue that work with that person. Whereas my therapist now, when I went to my therapist and I described a similar situation, my therapist held like literally a safe emotional space. She echoed kind of the feeling that I resonated with and connected with, and I felt validated by. So I think sometimes when folks are going into therapy, it's checking that particular vibe, right? I think sometimes vibes are okay, right? And the way I look at vibes is that vibes are kind of messages that you're receiving that are happening so quick that you can't give actual verbal explanation to it, but you feel it.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes when you go into a space, right, you may have a particular vibe with the clinician and it doesn't, right, it doesn't feel right. But I also tell folks and encourage folks, right, some folks, they know right off when it's going to work for them. Some folks, they need a little bit more time. So sometimes it's at the second session, sometimes it's at the third session where you're realizing, actually, I don't want to work with this person. It doesn't feel good. And there's no right or wrong answer around that. I think the other piece I'm thinking of what folks are looking for is what's the person's style of therapy, right? What sits for you? Some people need direction, right? They need direction. They need that concrete, structured, this is what we're working on. This is what we're doing. This is the kind of skill that we're going to practice, so on and so forth. Some people need someone who's psychodynamic in a way where they can move with you however you need at that moment. So some sessions may be a venting session, right, where you're getting all of that out. And some sessions may be a deep processing session where you're exploring these real particular nuances, you're understanding your schemas around things, right? You're understanding these connections of your traumas, right? And you're doing some real groundwork on that. And so it varies, right? And some people, they want a clinician where they feel like they could connect with them, where it's not this blank slate, right? Some psychotherapeutic styles is where the clinician has to be a blank slate, right? And that the person is essentially, you're saying everything and it has to bounce off of me and I'm supposed to be a reflection of it. That's not my particular style, right? I believe in disclosures and disclosures that are calculated, disclosures that have a potential purpose in that. And I think sometimes that helps with the connection because I think folks want to see their clinician as a human being versus seeing them as just kind of this robotic type of person. And what I've seen, particularly for folks of color, right, Black folks, right, that we don't necessarily, in some cases, want to sit there and talk to someone who's just kind of, blank slate, no reaction to anything that we're saying, right? Yep. We actually want that validation for someone to have an authentic reaction, authentic experience along with us. And that sometimes helps us along through that work. So, I mean, it varies, but I think those are kind of some top points that pop up for me when you ask that question.
Yeah, like give me an eyebrow or a
for real, right?
Something, right? Like they said what? Like I feel like, yeah, man, and that's gonna make me want to go into it a little deeper. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what I loved about like the Black male counselor that I was with, because I could talk all that rah-rah, right? And then he could look back, but he also knew how to incorporate spirituality into the conversation. We could have like street talk, we could have classroom talk, right? And so I was like, oh, I'm loving this. I can be myself. I could say like Shelby getting on my nerves, like, yo, all right, Yeah, those things are so important, so important. Right now I think the call for mental health is probably greater than ever. you know, for me, I had a breakdown with my family, and I have a group chat with my family, and we like pop off and like have a lot of fun in there. But I remember going off because I just felt like not felt, it was true, like every part of my identity was attacked. You had Breonna Taylor, who still has no justice, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
the movement is not necessarily saying consistently the names of the Black women who have been murdered by white supremacists and officers. You have, you know, if LGBTQ folk were going to even have rights, you know, that was in the Supreme Court. Now that the hand of the Supreme Court, and then you have, as always, Black bodies being killed right in the street. And so I didn't understand what was happening within me, and I like popped off on my family. And I'm like, this is not true. What's going on? I had to take some time and reflect, and I had to apologize. And I don't, to know me, to know Stephanie does not like to apologize. Working, right? So I'm like, as someone who, you know, I'm working on my 4th degree. I'm in the middle of reading the book, The Unapologetic Guide to Black Mental Health, like doing all of this work for myself, and I'm still reacting this way. What does that say? Like, what are people who are not Stephanie, like possibly experiencing in this day and time? Like with everything, what do you think is showing up for folk? And they may not recognize it as like, damn, I probably need to go sit on somebody's couch, or in a virtual world, I need to sit on my couch, but pull up, you know, the Zoom session.
No, I mean that's real, right? I think a lot of things. So interesting enough, a lot of things have been heavy, right? But when you kind of remove access, right, the kind of day to day that we have that acted as consistent distractions for us, right? That now a lot of times we have to sit with it, and we have to sit with these particular things or issues in the same space that we also have to rest in. Right. And so now, you know, my kitchen, right, has turned into my spot for my meetings, right? My spot to debrief and unpack some heavy stuff. It's the spot where I eat. It's the spot where I'm scrolling through social media and coming across articles, right? Speaking of those very injustices that you talked about. It's the spot where I'm unpacking other people's stuff. It's the spot where I'm unpacking my own stuff, right? And so, you know, our homes, unfortunately, for some of us, our homes have become a space where everything is happening. And we don't have access to these particular distractions that we tend to have had access to, and nor do we have that change of physical space that allows us to mentally switch in some ways. And so I do think that, right, that these things are now feeling exacerbated, right? Because I almost feel like I can't access, let alone I can't access some normality, right? I can't access some normality. I'm also, right, stuck with all of these things. Virtual, right, receiving virtual assistance is so different. It's awkward in some ways, right? I'm sitting on camera, I'm meeting the person for the first time on camera, and somehow through a camera, I'm supposed to be vulnerable and express all of these particular things, right? So I would even say therapeutic services for some people doesn't actually feel accessible. And these are the people that may actually have virtual access, right? Consistent Wi-Fi, things of that sort, right? But when we're thinking about folks who may not actually have the resources to be able to access those things, right? They're even further distanced from getting support. But I think like a lot of the feelings that you just expressed are kind of echoed throughout, like this sense of anger, right? But under all of that anger is kind of this hopelessness, this helplessness, you know, feeling invisible in many ways, feeling hurt, betrayal, right? I would say, because I think some of the concepts that you're talking about within Black communities, where as Black men or a Black cis male, myself, you know, and we're not giving much attention to our Black women that are murdered. You know, we're not giving much attention to our LGBTQ folks that are within the Black community that are murdered by other folks and us.
Yes.
Right. And so I think, you know, I think when all of that is happening, I think a sense of betrayal exists, because it's like, look, I'm going to ride for you. Right. I'm riding for you. I'm speaking out on these particular issues. I'm speaking on them. But you're silent. Not only are you silent, right, but you're complicit and a lot of these harms, these sort of oppressive dynamics that exist, on us, right? And we're your neighbors, right? We're here to be in this together. So I think when you're talking about what's going on for folks, it's a lot, right? And I think folks are operating in an egocentric way, right? I think sometimes you're having Black men, right, with these targets on their backs, and somehow, right, they can't in some way see past, not all Black men, right, but a good percentage, or that silence, we definitely want to give note to that, right? They can't see past a particular point. And they've also internalized what we're calling misogynoir, right? That there's misogyny that's specific to Black communities, right? There's things around African patriarchy that is also passed down, right? And so when we're centering Black men, not to say that Black men can't be centered, right? But we also want to recognize, right, our other Black folks that are in this struggle with us, and we want to give attention, equal attention, appropriate attention to that as well, right? But when we're centering certain bodies more than others, right, then we're engaging in the same oppressive dynamics. So I would even say there's this sort of divisiveness, right, that's existing within our communities, because certain people aren't necessarily speaking to certain things, and movements around it aren't happening. I mean, Breonna Taylor, right? How long has this been? There's been no movement on that. And what is that saying to our Black female identified folks, right? That your bodies don't matter, right? In some way, shape, or form, right? We're saying that with our LGBTQ folks, our trans Black women, right, that have been, right, murdered, right? What are we saying to them when we don't speak out against it in some way, shape, or form? So I think a lot of folks are exhausted, overwhelmed, tired. I think a lot of us are in crisis at this moment. I think we're in crisis, but unfortunately, given certain stigmas around Blackness, right, that we can't even acknowledge that we're in crisis. Right. To acknowledge that we're in crisis is to give some leeway that we're struggling. Right. But in actuality, it's contrary to Blackness, right? Because we always have to seem like we're resilient.
Yes.
And
it's tiring.
It's a lot.
that is a lot. And it's like, I need to rest. Like I've noticed a lot now. I have this in my cohort. It's a group of, it's probably about like 6 or 7 Black folk in a cohort of 19 doctoral students. So we have our own little chat to like help one another move through this. And there's times I'm like, yo, fam, I just can't do it today. I'm so thankful for this group of men and women who remind me constantly, put your own mask on first, right? Like we do it on the planes, we have to do it in life, period. Because the struggle right now between the pending election, the murders, the taking down statues, the conversations around that, all of those things, it becomes overwhelming. And you start to see this divide in folks that you thought were like your people, ain't your people. And so now you're feeling betrayed even more, because those are folks like you ate with me. You know what I mean? Like you was at my table talking to my children or my boo thing, whatever it is, and like this is how you feel? Cool. So it's a lot of different emotions going on. So we talked about some of the barriers that kind of we put on ourselves, right? As folks of color, especially Black people, to get into counseling. But what have you known in your experience about other barriers to counseling? Take away like COVID type stuff, right? But just in general.
I mean, the first one is finances, right? I think, therapeutic services are pricey. And if you have good insurance, then you're great, right? But if your insurance is subpar, like many of our insurances are whack, right? Like we have this extensive deductible that you have to reach prior to your insurance actually covering, and how much does your insurance cover? And unfortunately, sometimes you have clinicians that aren't necessarily operating in network for insurance, right? And they're operating in out of network sort of dynamics, out of pocket dynamics. And sometimes you have clinicians that aren't moving on that sliding scale fee, right? Sometimes you have clinicians that are sticking to that. And granted, right, understanding that they got to make their bread, they got to make their money, right? And it's understandable. And the other piece of it too, right, is that when you're thinking about Black clinicians or clinicians of color, right, there are other particular barriers or comforts that they don't necessarily have in order to be able to just, right, provide certain therapeutic services at a certain price.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, right? So I think finances, in a sense, where you want folks who want to access therapy, right? But we're all in some sort of form of struggle, right? But I'm trying to access therapy. I can only pay this particular amount. The clinician can only move this much, right? And that in itself could be a deterrence, right? Because I think if I can't pay for it or it becomes another out-of-pocket expense, the therapy loses its purpose because now it becomes another stressor. It becomes a financial burden, right, that I can't take on at this moment. And so even though I know and recognize that it's something that will benefit me and be helpful, maybe I met with the clinician once or twice. And I'm like, damn, this clinician is really good. I actually really want to work with them, but that fee I can't do, right? I cannot do it consistently. It becomes a deterrence. And I think the other piece of it too is that sometimes folks genuinely don't know where to look.
Yeah.
For clinicians of color, for clinicians that look like them. And sometimes when you go on Psychology Today or you go on to, any other sort of resource, I know Taraji P. Henson has the Boris Henson Foundation as a resource. But nonetheless, right, when you go on certain resources and you're kind of swimming in kind of a certain demographic of folks, you're like, damn, like where are the people that look like me? And not only where are they, right, but is their profile for you, does it speak loud enough for you? Does it feel, is it presented in a particular manner where you actually feel like they're accessible? So I think those are kind of some of I think the finance piece is like that one big thing that I've noticed as a barrier. And I think that's where we start to minimize the importance of it. We start to say, well, I'm not going to pay $150 to talk to somebody. I'm going to go talk to one of my peoples. I could just do that. Church is free. I could go to church, right? I could, kind of vent to my pastor or vent to folks within my congregation and things of that sort. So that's what I'm going to do. But unfortunately, that's a different type of support. That's a different type of help.
Yeah. Now, you were featured on Taraji P. Henson's project, right? Like that was
I was. I felt like a celebrity right quick. I was like, oh my God.
Right there, I'm like, oh, why did you talk to you? Okay.
It was wild. I think it was so random because I didn't even know. I think I don't know who hit me up, said, oh, like I think maybe it was one of my clients or something that sent me a screenshot of like, oh, like you on Taraji P thing. And mind you, I just so happened, it's a slew of clinicians on the resource, but I did not know that my face was going to make it on her Instagram page. I think that was wild, first and foremost.
I just feel like y'all family now, so you love Taraji now. But
I wish, but yeah.
But I mean, the financial barrier that is so real, and I know there's been times when I've been in and out of work and with or without insurance, so that has definitely been a deterrent. Do you think it's wise, or is it a possibility to negotiate? Like, hey, this is what my finances look like. This is the agreement we can come to. Instead of being here weekly or bi-weekly, can we do this monthly? Can you negotiate those terms, or is it whatever they say is what has to go?
I mean, you can absolutely negotiate or try to negotiate. Some clinicians are flexible, some don't. So interesting enough, a part of our ethics as counselors, as mental health providers, is that we ethically, right, should be operating on a sliding scale fee, making mental health services accessible.
Okay.
Now, clinicians go about that differently. And so some clinicians have a certain amount of slots, right, where they're saying, okay, I'm going to fill up 5 slots with a sliding scale fee. I'm not going past that particular slot. Right. And some clinicians, they'll operate in that way with maybe every client. It depends. on kind of where they're at within their career, where they're at financially, if they can afford to do that, is another piece. But I always encourage folks when they're seeking out services, negotiate, right? Say, look, I really want to work with you, but I can't afford that full fee, right? Do you offer a sliding scale fee? What's the lowest that you can go? Have that conversation with them, because I want folks to be able, and I think kind of my practice is around advocacy as well, right? To advocate for yourself, because if you don't bring it up, sometimes a lot of clinicians, they're not going to mention it to you. They're not going to say, oh, here's the sliding scale fee.
Yeah.
Right. If you don't bring it up, they're going to expect that, particularly especially if it's out of insurance, if it's not within insurance, they're going to expect that you're agreeing to that full fee, and they're going to have that very explicit conversation with you around that. But I definitely encourage folks to bring it up, to talk about what would it look like for biweekly. Some clinicians offer packages where, they'll say, oh, if you're committing to 10 sessions, here's how much that will be. And that in itself could be a discounted amount, right? So if I'm doing 6 sessions, maybe the total for the 6 sessions that I'm paying ends up being 100 a session besides 150, right? And so I think that in itself, sometimes those things can work. Sometimes you can talk about what would a bi-weekly look like. Now, the clinician, of course, in meeting with you will let you know that depending on your particular things that's coming up, that maybe bi-weekly may not be good, right? So the clinician may articulate that to you and say, that might not be a good fit, because given what you're describing, I don't think bi-weekly, a monthly will be kind of the best setup at this moment for you, right? And so we may need that weekly attention to address, or to kind of get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on.
Okay. So that's good to know, because I know from my experience, it's like been dictated. Like, you're going to be here once a week. And I'm like, but for how long? So I know if you go to college, they tell you you're going to get X amount of sessions. And I'm sure there's a lot that goes to that, right? Because it's a university, so there's a much people who need service. But I've never actually had someone tell me outside of that, hey, we're going to rock like 10 sessions, and then let's see where we are. Let's revisit, or something like that. It's like, ever. You're so damaged that you're going to be with me for life. Like, that's the way it goes. So I think it's good to know that those are things to inquire about, because I think we enter into those spaces and we don't know what to expect, and we don't know what to ask. We don't know what our rights are. Like, we know that sheet that you give us about your ethics, and that you're not going to divulge your information. You'll report if we talk about self-harm or harm of someone else. But outside of that, we're like, I'm at your mercy. So it's good to have that information, so people can go into those sessions as they're doing their research and armed with that information, because no one tells you that.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, so it almost feels like, it's counseling like a scam? You're just trying to get my money? Because I know I've been there, especially if I'm angry at a therapist. Like, I'm like, you just want my money, So, those are all great things to know. That's real. I guess really the last thing I want to touch on is, like, what advice would you give to folk right now? There are some people who are still fighting the thought of counseling. There are some that's like looking like, I think I want to do it, but I'm not really ready, or in it and feeling conflicted. So what advice would you give to folk, especially our people, about taking that leap?
Yeah, I mean, I would tell folks to take the leap, like explicitly, to try it once, try it twice, to not feel like you have to commit to it right now, right? I think sometimes when folks engage or feel like they have to when they're accessing a particular service, it's like, well, I'm not ready to commit to it. And sometimes, like, you can just go and access that particular service, see what it feels like for you, and then make that decision right then and there, right? Whether you're going to commit or you don't, but know that you don't have to, that there is an option, that it's an autonomous experience, right? It doesn't have to be something where it's all or nothing, right? I got to go into it hard body, or or I don't do it at all. Like sometimes it's okay to just flirt with the line a little bit, right? To try it out, meet with the person. The other thing that I suggest too for folks is that sometimes searching for the right therapist is exhausting.
Yeah.
It's a lot, right? Because sometimes you're reaching out to clinicians. Clinicians may not be responsive, for whatever reason. Sometimes you shop for a clinician, you talk to them, like I said, or mentioned earlier, right? You talk to them, you're like, I'm not feeling this. I'm not feeling this person specifically. And then that becomes kind of a deterrence overall to keep seeking therapeutic services.
Right.
And so one of my suggestions would be to kind of push back on that when you go into looking for therapy, think of it as shopping, right? Or in some ways a relationship. So when you say you broke up with your therapist, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's going into it and recognizing, okay, this relationship doesn't work for me. Let me look for another relationship or potential relationship that might be helpful, that might be good, right? So don't allow yourself to be deterred from one bad experience. And at the same time, it's okay to take a break from shopping. Because as stated, right, I think it's exhausting to go through the process. It's exhausting to find the right clinician. And I think it takes a lot to reach out, right? It takes a lot of energy to actually reach out, to acknowledge your issues, and to even start to open up and express those particular issues, even if it's in an initial session or just a 15-minute consultation. It's a lot. So I think it's also okay for folks to shop, break, take that break, and then when you're ready to get back into it, do it. And don't even feel like you have to do it all at once. Allow yourself to, pace yourself. That's okay. Um, and another piece I tell folks is that if you're doing it, allow yourself to be invested in it. Allow yourself to sit with the discomfort. Therapy is not, I don't tell people therapy is not an easy process. Therapy can be very hard. Therapy can be significantly uncomfortable because we're touching on issues and things that maybe you've never talked about. You haven't had that safe space to process it. You haven't had that safe space to even acknowledge it, right? And so I think it's an uncomfortable thing, and it's okay to be uncomfortable within the process. That's fine. It's a part of it. And I think that's kind of the top things that stick out for me.
You mentioned something and it brought something up for me when we were talking about like breaking up with your therapist. Is it possible to outgrow your therapist? So let's say we've been together 6 months, maybe a year or so, and it's just like that relationship with Bay. You're like, you know what, this ain't leading to marriage, so I don't really know, right? Can you have that same experience, and should you have that same experience on your journey with the therapist?
Absolutely. I would say that you should have that experience on your journey with the therapist, right? I think I want my clients to outgrow me, right? In a sense where I serve my purpose for that moment, right? And sometimes a different therapist is needed. Sometimes whatever work that we needed to do, we did that work. And maybe a different modality of treatment is necessary for the person, right? Maybe they don't need treatment at the moment, right? Because I like to let my clients know that I'm not trying to keep you in therapy forever, right? I'm trying to make sure that as you're working with me, we're addressing those particular things that's going on for you, but you're also developing some skills where you feel like you can actually have the confidence to address these issues on your own or within the support system that you set up for yourself through our therapeutic journey, right? And so I want clients to feel like they can kind of go out and venture out and transition on. And it's not a bad thing, right? It's an indicator that whatever work needed to happen between you two happened. And that's okay. And so maybe you go a year without therapy or a few months without therapy, and you're like, all right, I'm looking for another clinician. I myself, I've had 3 therapists, right? One I worked with, and all 3 of them were phenomenal. And we all worked on various different things, different moments in my life that felt good and helpful, right? And so I think it's okay to kind of match or seek services in that particular way.
So now we know we have some great takeaways from this. But if someone listening to this says, man, I want to check this dude out, how can someone connect with you, sir? Like, what's that look like?
No, absolutely. So, I mean, as stated, my practice is called the Cactus Center. You can literally look it up, the Cactus Center in New Jersey. You could Google it. You could find me. You can Google my name, Jean Semelfort, Jean Semelfort. I tell folks they can call me Jean if they feel fancy. You could check me out on my Instagram. It's at Jean Semelfort. You can email me. My email is cactuscenternj@gmail.com. You could contact me on my website. You could look me up on Psychology Today. Also on the Boris Henson Foundation. I'm a resource identified there as well. So there are multiple ways to get in contact with me. One of the easy ways that I found is folks just kind of Google my name and then they just contact me from there. My name is very unique, so it is significantly easy to find me.
Okay. All right. Cool. Man, listen, I want to thank you so much for carving out some time tonight to kick it with me and really bring this information to the listeners, because no one is really talking about this. We have, like you said earlier, celebrities are starting to post about it. You got like Wale is one rapper who came out. I think Kid Cudi came out and they started talking about mental health. And so I think that has like tuned in the community, the hip hop community, like, wait a minute, what's happening? We see Kanye West breaking down consistently. Like, you gotta pray for that brother, uplift him, get him back in therapy and on his meds. But we don't have these conversations. And so I think sometimes we see or hear celebrities talking about these things, and it's like, man, what are they trying to sell us? What are they plugging for their next movie or a project? Not realizing that this has been something that our communities have needed for so long. And but no one's ever talked to us like this. And so I thank you for being in this space with me, this virtual space with me, and just being real, being your, being open to being your authentic self and dropping knowledge on these folks. So thank you so much for joining me tonight. I'm gonna let you continue to hydrate, and I'm going to get into this apple ginger situation over here.
I'm gonna have to check that out. But Steph, I appreciate you having me in this space. I think it's a necessary conversation. You good peoples, I think the work that you're doing around this stuff is phenomenal and necessary. We go way back. Yeah, so I'm here for it. I'm here for it. And I think it's a necessary conversation that needs to continue. So yeah, thank you for holding this space.
No problem at all. And to everybody that's listening, check it out. It's okay to not be okay, and it's okay to do the research and identify someone and sit down virtually, or if you are able to physically be in a space, to have those conversations. You may enter the space and talking about something that's just happening right now, and that's okay. You may want to revisit childhood trauma. That's okay. Somehow something is all going to connect and click. And working on your mental health is actually a benefit to working on your physical health, because that stress, it will show up. It will show up physically, and you wondering why you sick, and you wonder why you got headaches or your body aches. Like, if you get your mental health right, it is one step closer to getting like your physical and emotional health right. So I encourage you all to take that leap. If you have a job that offers counseling services, some of you can have access to a couple of free sessions. Jean gave you a bunch of resources through the conversation that you can start to Google. So man, take care of yourself. Mind your social media intake, because that could cause more trauma or re-traumatization. So you want to be mindful of those things. And I appreciate you all for tuning in. And I'm just going to go on and on. Man, maybe I'm just rambling. But we about to be out. I'll holler at y'all next week.